Chapter 3. Max stepped into the waning sunlight, the heavy door of the lecture hall swinging shut behind him with a muted thud. His arms were laden with essays scrawled on by earnest hands, each carrying the weight of youthful thought and aspiration. A faint smile played across his lips, a testament to the spirited discussion that had closed out the day's class. A heated debate on the romanticism of Keats that left an invigorating buzz in the air. His mind wandered as it often did these days. He thought of Lydia and then of the two girls he had helped the week before. He had brought them home and they had shared a meal. They talked for a bit, nothing important or meaningful, just random stuff. He had excused himself to go to the bathroom, and they had left. Their distrust of people ran deeper than he thought. But in today's world, who could blame them? As he crossed the university grounds, the briskness of the autumn air seemed to breathe new life into his weary limbs. Golden leaves danced around his feet while distant laughter and the murmur of conversations filled the spaces between the old brick buildings. He detoured from his usual route home to make his way through the university town Central Park. For some reason, he felt like walking more than usual. There, on a weathered bench by the great oak, sat two figures as out of place as sonnets in a physics textbook. It was Maggie and Stokely sitting together, looking weary. They appeared even skinnier than before, and Maggie was sporting a bruise on the left side of her face. Something had happened. He studied them for a moment. They had not seen him yet. Maggie's long, dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, untamed and free, framing blue eyes that held the depth of an ocean. During a storm, beautiful but concealing unseen currents below. Beside her, Stokely's vibrant expression was dulled, her curls having lost some of their usual defiance against gravity. The sisters sat side by side, united not just by blood, but by the shared fortress of guarded glances they offered to the world. Mac's steps slowed, his gaze lingering on the pair. He once again thought of his Lydia. What would she do? Should he approach them again? They had left him at his home last week. He wanted to help them. He had been able to feed them and wanted to do more, but was he pushing too hard? It was then Mac noticed a dirty bandage around Maggie's hand. Maggie was injured. Yeah, he was going to approach them. Adjusting the stack beneath his arm, Mac's path altered almost imperceptibly, drawing him toward the enigmatic duo. Each footfall was measured, the soft tap of his shoes on the pavement, a steady rhythm in the quiet symphony of campus life. As he approached, the subtle lines of concern etched into his features hinted at a heart that had known loss, but still recognized the shape of hardship in others. Mac closed the distance with a gentle gait, his warm smile a soft beacon in the cool shadows of the late afternoon. Hello again, he said, his voice imbued with the richness of someone who often spoke in the timbre of thoughtful prose. I was wondering if I would see you again. Maggie's piercing blue eyes met Mac's gaze for an instant. A flash of curiosity, and then recognition shining through her otherwise impenetrable resolve. Stokely just gave him a small smile when she looked up. Mac lowered his stack of papers onto the bench with a quiet, reassuring thud. The organized chaos of graded essays and lecture notes, forgotten for the briefest of respites. He eased himself down beside Maggie and Stokely, leaving enough space to be polite, but close enough to invite conversation. Maggie, he said softly, and what happened to your hand? Maggie flinched slightly at the mention of her hand, her fingers instinctively curling around the bandage that concealed the wound beneath. Her gaze shifted downwards for a moment, a flicker of vulnerability crossing her features, before she looked back up at Mac with a mixture of defiance and reluctance. It's nothing, she replied curtly, her voice laced with a stubborn pride that wavered ever so slightly. Just a stupid accident. Stokely shot Maggie a knowing glance, silently communicating a message that only the two sisters seemed to understand. Despite Maggie's attempt to deflect the concern, Stokely couldn't hide the unease that lingered in her eyes, mirroring the worry that tugged at Mac's empathetic heart. Mac studied them both for a moment, his gentle gaze moving from Maggie's guarded expression to Stokely's silent plea for understanding. He knew there was more to the story than they were willing to share at this moment, but he felt he had a pretty good idea that whatever had transpired, it was not good. You know, I've always liked this park. I didn't grow up here, but where I lived was similar with the changing of the seasons and all that. The girls watched, seemingly taken aback by the shift in his conversation. See, you sitting here reminds me of my own afternoons, back when I was more knees and elbows than anything else, he continued, a chuckle woven into his words. I used to spend hours just lying on the grass, reading. Books were my escape, my adventures. Mac's hands unconsciously traced the edges of his papers, a tactile connection to his past and present. It wasn't always easy, though. There were days when it seemed like the characters in those stories understood me better than the folks around me. Maggie's gaze lingered on Mac, her eyes softening as if his nostalgic confession had unlocked something within her. Stokely's posture relaxed incrementally, the invisible armor she wore thinning in response to Mac's openness. Guess what I'm trying to say is, we all have our tales of growing up, of finding our place, he said, giving them a gentle smile that reached the crow's feet etched at the corners of his eyes. And sometimes sharing a chapter or two can make the journey seem a little less daunting. Mac's anecdote hung in the air, an offering of trust extended without expectation, waiting to be met by the mysterious pages of Maggie and Stokely's own unwritten chapters. The breeze rustled through the leaves overhead, mingling with the distant chatter of students dispersing from their classes. Mac folded his hands in his lap, his gaze steady and patient as he waited for Maggie and Stokely to take their turn in the conversation's gentle give and take. Maggie fiddled with a frayed edge of her sleeve, her voice barely more than a whisper when she finally spoke. We've been on our own for a while now. It's not like in the books, where you find a magical place or a hidden treasure that fixes everything. Stokely nodded, her fingers entwining with Maggie's. Yeah, we've had to make our way through some rough patches, she added. Her eyes, which moments ago seemed impenetrable, now reflected a depth of experience far beyond her years. Mac leaned forward slightly, his expression compassionate, his heart echoing their words with a familiar ache. Life sure can throw some curveballs, he said softly. But it sounds to me like you both have incredible strength. Not everyone could navigate such waters. Doesn't feel like strength, Maggie murmured, her shoulders slumping with the weight of remembrance. Sometimes, Mac continued, his voice a warm timbre of support, strength isn't about feeling powerful. It's about moving forward, even when every step feels heavy. It's about facing those challenges head on, just like you're doing. He paused, his gaze encompassing both girls, ensuring they felt seen and understood. You know, the last time I saw you, I offered and shared meal with you. Now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to offer you a meal and a place to stay, even if it's just for the night. I also want to look at that hand, Maggie. Stokely's gaze averted and Maggie's back stiffened. Their eyes met his, a silent acknowledgement flowing between them, weaving a thread of connection. The girls both nodded. They were going to let him help them, at least for now. Mac glanced at his watch, then back to the girls with a thoughtful expression. The golden hue of the setting sun wrapped around the university buildings, casting long shadows on the lawn. With careful consideration, he leaned back against the bench and offered a casual proposal. What do you think, you two? My place. I will grab Albie and we can find some food. I can even introduce you to Mr. and Mrs. Baker. He used to be a cop, and they are very nice. Maggie and Stokely exchanged a glance that was less about suspicion and more about the possibility of warmth and nourishment. They seemed to weigh their options, the idea of a meal stirring more than just appetite. It hinted at normalcy, a respite from their chaotic world. Could we maybe hear what's on the menu before deciding? Maggie's tone was light, a touch of humor peeking through her usual guardedness. You know, because we have so many other prospects we'd hate to miss out. Ah, Mac chuckled, tugging at his collar in mock seriousness. I believe tonight's special is homemade lasagna, with a side of whatever greens I can muster up from the garden. And perhaps, if my culinary skills don't fail me, a warm apple crisp for dessert. Stokely's mouth twitched into a smile, the thought of homemade food clearly appealing. She nudged Maggie gently with her elbow, encouragingly. Okay, Professor Elliot, Maggie conceded with a tentative nod. We'll take you up on that offer. It does sound better than, well, nothing that we had planned. Mac, please, he corrected lightly, the corners of his eyes deepening with the ease of the moment. After all, friends dine together, not professors and students. Mac, then, Stokely said, her voice stronger now, an emerging trust threading through the syllables. Great, Mac beamed, gathering the stack of papers beside him as he rose. Then let's not let this beautiful evening go to waste. The three of them stood together, a newfound camaraderie budding between the trio. As they stepped off the campus grounds, the last rays of sunlight danced across the scene, weaving a soft glow around the promise of a shared meal and the chance for understanding and friendship. Mac shuffled his stack of graded papers into a neat pile, the crisp sounds of alignment briefly cutting through the hush of the evening air. With practiced ease, he stood, muscles protesting mildly from the hours spent seated. He extended a hand to Maggie, then Stokely, their fingers brushing against his in hesitant acceptance, as they allowed him to pull them gently to their feet. "Shall we?" Max said, with an encouraging nod toward the direction of his home. The girls rose, dusting off their clothes and shouldering a backpack. The girls smelled. He wondered when the last time they had taken a shower was. As they began their walk, the gravel crunched beneath their shoes, and Mac found himself leading just half a pace ahead, cognizant of the space they might need. The sun dipped low, painting the world in hues of gold and amber, shadows stretching long and thin like the hours of the day. Mac started, his voice casual as if he were discussing the weather rather than attempting to bridge gaps of guardedness. Albie has this peculiar habit of greeting me at the door with something from the garbage bin, as if he's presenting a trophy. A smile touched the corners of his mouth, the absurdity of the image softening his features. "How is Albie?" asked Stokely as they made their way to his house. The girls shared a look, an unreadable exchange passing between them. It was as if Granville's silent understanding had echoed across the distance, resonating with a frequency they recognized. Must be nice having such good company," Maggie admitted, her tone thawing by degrees, hinting at a longing, perhaps, for connection, for a presence that could sit with sorrow without the need for words. "Very much so," Mac nodded. "And he's always up for an adventure, whether it's a stroll through the neighborhood or a trip to the beach. He makes the simple things feel extraordinary." "Seems like you've got quite the partner in crime," Stokely said, a playful note dancing in her voice. "Indeed I do," Mac replied warmly. "And tonight you'll have the grand opportunity to meet him. Who knows? Maybe he'll decide to bestow upon you the honor of his latest treasure." Their laughter, light and brief, wove into the fabric of the evening, a thread of joy amidst the complex tapestry of their lives. Slowly, the armor of wariness that Maggie and Stokely wore began to loosen, piece by piece, replaced by the blossoms of trust and the flickers of curiosity ready to unfurl in the warmth of genuine kindness. Chapter 4. The moment the front door creaked open, a burst of excitement filled the modest living room as Maggie and Stokely stepped inside Mac's home. This was their second visit, but the warmth that welcomed them felt like a gentle embrace, one they had longed for without knowing it. Albie, who had come around the corner to the front hallway like a giant slobbering missile, seemed to share in the jovial spirit, his tail thumping against the hardwood floor like a metronome keeping time with their racing hearts. "Albie!" Stokely laughed, her voice bubbling with delight as Albie bounded over. The giant dog nuzzled into the girls with such enthusiasm that Maggie nearly lost her balance, steadying herself with a giggle that seemed foreign coming from her lips, a sound of pure, unguarded joy. "Easy there, boy," Mac warned softly, though the corners of his eyes crinkled with a smile that echoed his own pleasure at the sight. "You'll knock them right off their feet." Watching the girls interact with the gentle giant, Mac could almost see the shadows of their mysterious past lighten. But he knew better than to believe a few moments of laughter could erase the hardship they'd faced. Hey," he said, his tone casual yet considerate. "I was thinking, if you'd like, you can use the shower. I know it's been a while since—" He trailed off, not wanting to impose upon their painful memories. Maggie exchanged a hesitant glance with Stokely, her grip tightening momentarily around the strap of her worn backpack. Mac understood that hesitation all too well, the instinctive fear that came from being vulnerable, especially for young girls who had likely faced dangers most could not imagine. "Listen," Mac continued gently, reading their uncertainty. "The main guest bedroom at the end of the hall, it's got a lock on the inside. You can freshen up in there, both of you. No one will bother you, I promise." His words were careful, respectful of the boundaries they so fiercely guarded. Stokely bit her lip, considering the offer, while Maggie's eyes lifted to meet Mac's gaze. There was an unspoken question there, a silent probing for sincerity, and perhaps a hint of hope. "Okay," Maggie finally murmured, the word fragile but laden with trust. "Thank you, Mr. Elliot." "Mac," he corrected gently, a reassurance of familiarity. "And don't worry about clothes. I'll find something clean for you to change into. I will leave them right outside the door and get back to cooking dinner." The girls smiled at him, and then Maggie took Stokely's hand and they moved. As he watched the girls disappear down the hallway, the faded wallpaper peeling slightly at the edges, Mac couldn't help but think of the many chapters he'd read aloud to eager students, filled with characters overcoming odds for a chance at redemption. And here in the quiet sanctuary of his home, Life seemed to imitate art, offering these two brave souls a page-turning opportunity for a new beginning. Mac made his way to the bedroom that once belonged to him and his wife, feeling a strange amalgamation of nostalgia and purpose. He opened the closet, the scent of lavender still clinging faintly to the fabrics. Carefully, he selected a couple of soft t-shirts and shorts, not too short, that he thought would fit the girls. His hands lingered on the fabric, warmed by memories. Hopefully, these will do, he whispered to himself, as if needing the reassurance that he was doing the right thing, by offering up pieces of a past life he held dear. Returning downstairs, Mac moved with quiet efficiency through the kitchen, the creak of the hardwood floor beneath his feet, a familiar refrain. He began to rummage through the pantry for ingredients. Cooking had always been a cathartic process for him, a way to focus the mind and nurture the soul. As the onion sizzled and the rich aroma of garlic filled the air, there was a knock at the door. Mac wiped his hands on a dish towel and went to answer it, finding Mrs. Baker standing on his porch, holding an aluminum foil-covered dish that was slightly lopsided. "Evening, Mac," she greeted with her usual cheery disposition, extending the dish towards him. "Brought you some pie. Well, let's just say it's my latest attempt." "Thank you, Ms. Baker," Mac said, accepting the dish while suppressing a smile. Her culinary creations were notoriously unpredictable, but her heart was always in the right place. "Call me Eleanor, please," she insisted, peering around him. "Smells wonderful in here. You expecting company?" "Something like that," Mac replied evasively, not wanting to dive into explanations just yet. "Ah, I won't pry. You know where to find me if you need anything," Eleanor said, stepping back. She gave him a knowing nod and ambled off down the path. Closing the door, Mac chuckled to himself, setting the pie aside. He would have to investigate its contents later, preferably with a fire extinguisher at hand. "Mr. Elliot?" The voice came from the top of the stairs, tentative but clear. "Please, just Mac," he called out, turning to see Maggie and Stokely emerging from the hallway, their hair damp and their faces scrubbed clean. Their eyes held the tentative glow of newfound comfort. Good, they found the cloths. Just then, another knock resonated through the house. This time, Mac opened the door to a smiling Eleanor, who'd forgotten her scarf. As she retrieved it, her gaze landed on the girls. "Who do we have here?" Eleanor asked, her curiosity piqued. These are some far-off relatives visiting for a bit," Mac interjected smoothly, giving the girls an encouraging nod. "Nice to meet you," Maggie said, extending a hand, which Eleanor shook with enthusiasm. "Likewise," Eleanor beamed. "Well, enjoy your family time." With a final wave, she left, none the wiser. "Let's eat, shall we?" Mac suggested, guiding the girls to the table where the spread awaited them, the mystery pie sitting off to the side, awaiting its fate. The sizzle of onions and garlic in the pan filled the kitchen with a homely scent. As Mac stirred the contents, casting an occasional glance toward Maggie and Stokely. The girls sat at the kitchen table, their freshly washed hair catching the soft light that filtered through the window. "Mac, why didn't you tell Ms. Baker about us?" Stokely's voice was hesitant, her fingers fiddling with the hem of the oversized shirt she wore. Mac glanced over his shoulder, offering a reassuring smile. "Eleanor is wonderful, but she's got ears like a hawk and a curiosity to match. If I'd told her your real story, I'm not sure we could keep it just between us." He added a dash of thyme to the pan, the herb's earthy fragrance mingling with the aromatic base. "Besides," he continued, "I reckon you've had enough of the state poking around in your lives." His voice was gentle, understanding, as he transferred the browned chicken thighs into the pot. Maggie nodded, her eyes reflecting a depth of gratitude and wariness. "Thank you, Mac," she said softly. "Nothing to thank me for," Mac replied, focusing on adjusting the temperature of the stove. "Now, let's talk about something cheerful. How do you girls feel about dessert?" Eleanor brought over what I think might be a pie, but with her cooking skills, it's always a bit of an adventure. A giggle escaped from Stokely, breaking the tension as Maggie joined in with a smile. It was a sound Mac hadn't realized he'd been longing to hear in this quiet house. "An adventure sounds perfect," Maggie said with a playful quirk to her lips. "Excellent," Mac chuckled, "because after dinner, we're going to dive into that mystery together." He busied himself with setting the table, placing utensils and dishes with care, creating a space that felt less like a stopgap and more like a gathering. He laid out the food he had prepared, a hearty chicken casserole accompanied by fresh bread and a garden salad. He had prepared the lasagna, but thought the girls might need some protein to start. Maybe another time. "Come on, girls, let's eat," Mac invited, motioning toward the table. As they settled into their seats, he served generous portions onto their plates, ensuring each girl had plenty. He watched as they took tentative bites, their expressions softening with each mouthful. "Mac, this is really good," Maggie complimented, her guardedness slipping away bite by bite. "Thanks," Mac replied warmly. Good food has a way of making things feel right, even when they aren't quite there yet. As the meal progressed, the atmosphere in the room grew lighter, the sense of comfort seeping into the walls and the souls within them. Mac noted the change, a contented hum settling in his chest. They were strangers still in many ways, but here, around his table, they were starting to weave the fragile beginnings of something deeper and more profound. The clinking of cutlery against plates punctuated the silence that had settled around them. Mac watched Maggie push a carrot around her plate before she took a deep breath and met his gaze. "Mom, she passed away when we were little," Maggie started, her voice barely above a whisper. "Dad couldn't handle it. Got tangled up with the law. We've bounced around foster homes ever since." Stokely's fork paused midair, her eyes distant as if the memories painted themselves across the walls for only her to see. None of them felt right. None of them were safe, she added, her voice tinged with a weary sadness, far too mature for her years. "We finally left when one of the sons of our foster parents tried to do. Well, let's just say he tried to do something bad to me." Mac's heart clenched at their words. He set his own fork down, giving them his full attention, nodding gently to encourage her to continue. "It's been hard. We've been on the street for 2 years, and it's gone about as well as you can imagine. We mostly sleep in abandoned buildings or at the shelter when I think we can get away with it. When the workers see minors, they always try to get the state involved." He nodded to her hand. "How did that happen?" Maggie traced the outline of a bruise on her hand, a shadow crossing her features. 2 weeks ago, some guy, he tried to grab Stokely. I found a bat in a dumpster, and I didn't do too much damage, but got him off me," Stokely interjected, reaching out to squeeze her sister's hand. "The police got involved," Maggie continued, her eyes flicking to Mac, searching for something he couldn't quite name. "Turns out the guy was a runaway too, ended up pretending to be some kind of street kingpin. Said he wanted to help us." Mac absorbed every word, every pause filled with unspoken pain. His admiration grew for these 2 young souls who had endured more than many could bear. He saw not just the scars of their past, but the strength that had propelled them forward. Resilience isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward, Mac said, his voice soft yet firm, echoing a truth he'd learned through his own losses. Maggie and Stokely exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them, before they both turned back to Mac, an unspoken agreement in their eyes. Maggie continued their story. As he listened, Mac couldn't help but watch the girls. So much pain, loss, and fear. He really wanted to help them. Hopefully they would let him. Albie lay by the back door, ears perked at the sound of laughter drifting in from the living area. Maggie's chuckles mingled with Stokely's softer one. "Albie seems to have taken quite a liking to you both," Mac commented, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips as he observed Maggie gently patting the dog's head. "Big dogs are the best," Stokely replied, her voice tinged with newfound ease. "They're like protective giants." "Protective giants," Mac repeated thoughtfully, nodding in agreement. "I suppose they are." He saw the way Maggie's eyes softened when she glanced at Stokely, protective in her own right. It was a quiet testament to their bond, one that spoke of shared hardships and an unyielding determination to keep each other safe. "Listen," Mac began, leaning against the counter and crossing his arms, his expression serious yet gentle. "I know we've only known each other a short while, but I would like to try to help you." He let those words hang in the air, allowing the depth of his commitment to seep into the room. "I can't replace what you've lost," he continued, his heart feeling the weight of every word. "But I want to offer you a place with me, even if it's just temporary." Maggie blinked rapidly, her eyes astonished and happy, before she quickly masked it with her usual guarded composure. Stokely, on the other hand, allowed a small, hopeful smile to bloom across her features. "Professor Elliot Mac," Maggie corrected herself, the title seeming too formal for this moment. "What are you saying?" Mac met Maggie's gaze with unwavering sincerity, his own eyes reflecting a mix of compassion and determination. "I'm saying I want to help. I can offer you a safe place to stay, a home where you don't have to worry about where your next meal is coming from or where you'll rest your head at night," he said, his voice gentle yet firm. Maggie's breath caught in her throat, disbelief mingling with a glimmer of hope in her eyes. Stokely reached out to grasp her sister's hand, the unspoken bond between them stronger than ever in this moment. "We don't want to impose," Maggie began, her voice hesitant as if she couldn't quite believe such kindness was being extended to them. "You wouldn't be imposing," Mac interjected, his tone warm and reassuring. "You've already brought light into this house. A sense of life I didn't realize was missing until you walked through that door." The clinking of dishes punctuated the silence that had fallen over the dinner table. Maggie toyed with the remains of her meal, while Stokely traced the grain of the wooden table with a fingertip, lost in thought. Mac observed them from across the room, allowing them this moment of quiet introspection. "Would you like some tea?" Mac asked, his voice breaking the stillness as he stood and moved toward the stove. "It's chamomile, very soothing." Maggie lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes, and nodded almost imperceptibly. The corners of Stokely's mouth curved upwards, her expression softening at the simple offer. "Thank you," Stokely said, her voice barely above a whisper. As Mac filled the kettle and set it on the burner, Maggie's guard remained, her body language taut, like a bowstring drawn tight. But there was something different in her eyes now, a faint shimmer that spoke of a battle between skepticism and the burgeoning possibility of trust. Stokely, more open in her yearning for relief from their tumultuous past, allowed her eyes to wander around the room, taking in the walls lined with bookshelves, the cozy furniture, and the framed photographs that told stories of a life once shared. "Mac," she began, her curiosity getting the better of her, "why do you care so much? We're just two girls you barely know." Mac turned from the stove, leaning against the counter as he regarded them both warmly. "I see two remarkable young women," he replied, his voice steady and sincere. "And maybe I can't undo what's happened, but I believe everyone deserves a chance at happiness, at a safe place to call home." The kettle whistled, cutting through the heavy emotional air, and Mac busied himself with making the tea. The steam rose in gentle spirals as he poured the hot water into 3 mugs. "Not here," he said, placing a mug in front of each girl. The warmth from the ceramics seeped into their hands, comforting, inviting. Maggie wrapped her fingers around the mug, the heat grounding her. She watched Mac sit down with his own cup, his presence neither intrusive nor distant. It was then, in the simplicity of sharing tea, that she felt the first threads of connection weaving themselves into a tentative sense of belonging. "Now maybe we could try," Maggie murmured, surprising even herself with the admission. Stokely reached out, placing her hand over Maggie's. Their eyes met, and a silent understanding passed between them. Here, they weren't runaways or foster system statistics. They were just Maggie and Stokely. And Mac was offering them more than shelter. He was offering them hope. Mac smiled, recognizing the monumental step they were contemplating. "No pressure," he reassured them. "We'll take it one day at a time." The girls exchanged a glance, a decision made without words. They would stay for now and see where this unexpected path might lead. As they sipped their tea, a new dynamic took root in the quiet house. For Mac, it was a chance to fill the emptiness that had lingered too long. For Maggie and Stokely, it was the beginning of a journey away from fear and toward healing. With each sip, the shadows of their past seemed to recede ever so slightly, replaced by the flickering light of a shared future. And as the night drew in, wrapping the house in its serene embrace, the chapter ended with the promise of a dawn yet to come. A dawn full of possibilities for Mac, Maggie, and Stokely.